So, welcome everyone. Good evening. Welcome to this evening's live discussion on James Tod's Rajasthan, organized by Sahapedia. Before we move on to the live discussion, I'd like to tell you briefly about Sahapedia. Sahapedia is an open encyclopedic resource on the arts, cultures, and histories of India. Sahapedia offers digital content in multimedia format, articles and books, photo essays and video, interviews and oral histories, maps and timelines, authored by scholars and curated by experts. Subject areas range from ideas and belief systems, rituals and practices to visual and performing arts. Today's live session is a part of the Roots of Rajasthan project, partnered with the Royal Rajasthan Foundation, the social impact arm of Rajasthan Royals, to document the cultural heritage of the state of Rajasthan. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Rima Hooja. She is the director of MSMS-II Museum, City Palace, Jaipur, as well as the director of Jaigarh Public Charitable Trust. Dr. Rima Hooja is an archaeologist, historian, and a writer. She is the managing trustee of Jaipur Virasat Foundation, visiting faculty of School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi, fellow Royal Asiatic Society, vice president ICOMOS-India, and a former member of India's National Monuments Authority. Her books include Rajasthani Stories Retold, History of Rajasthan, and Maharana Pratap. She runs Animal Care Trust, housing many cats. Today, as we celebrate Rajasthan's State Formation Day, we will talk about James Tod's Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan, which is considered an important work in Indian history. Dr. Rima will talk about James Tod, his writings, and their importance in the historiography of Rajasthan itself. Dr. Rima, the screen is yours.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone listening in. Thank you to Sahapedia for giving me this opportunity. What I will do is probably go all over the place in my discussion on Tod, but then it is because he becomes a multifaceted character as he lives and grows and finally leaves India. So I think my opening statement basically is that over the years, Tod has become a much dissected figure, and he is often a much abused historian of Rajasthan. Because people say, what did he know, or did he know enough? That sort of conversation. So James Tod's Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan, in 2 volumes, and his other book, Travels in Western India, are part of the basic readings that a lot of people would have before coming into the Rajasthan area. And the Padma Bhushan professors, Suzanne Hober-Rudolph, and again Padma Bhushan, Professor Lloyd Rudolph, and their other American colleagues. Whenever they would be coming into Rajasthan, they would be, the kind of mandatory reading for them would be Tod. A lot of civil servants in the 50s and 60s were also using Tod to understand Rajasthan. Not as much as maybe there were some other books they were using, but certainly Tod is something that becomes familiar to them. Now, Tod has been dead and gone a long time ago, but I met Tod when I was about 5 or 6 years old. So not quite my first person meeting really. It's just that with my parents and my older brother, we were traveling somewhere in Rajasthan. I know where it is now, I didn't then. And we passed through a place that they were talking about, my parents and my brother, that was Todgarh and Tatgarh also, as they were being. And I was wondering, I said, Tod, do they mean a toad? What are they on about? And then they said Merwada, and I thought they were mispronouncing Mewar, which is the state where the capital used to be, Udaipur. And then we stopped at this old-fashioned bungalow. But then in my childhood, there were still a lot of those old-fashioned bungalows left. And this one still stands at Todgarh. So now Todgarh is a place near enough Ajmer, but it was named after James Tod. I mean, all of that I got to know over time. But that was like an introduction to somebody who had lived in India, who had left his heart behind in this part of the world, and had written profusely. And the conversation had been about something that Tod had been writing. A few years later, we were passing another bit of Rajasthan, and there was a fort on a hill in the background. And there are always forts on a hill in some background when you travel through the Rajasthan countryside. And again, my older brother informed me in that very, the pontifical way that an older sibling can. And he says, you probably don't know, but that's Hamirgarh, named after Raja Hamir. And then he made some reference to Hamir, the obstinacy of, never giving up, Hamir Hut. And he said, Tod has written about it. So Tod was there somewhere in the background as I grew up in Rajasthan, and somewhere in the background because history, heritage, about the past, one of the things people knew of was these written texts that they would maybe refer to, but certainly talk about. And that was the Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan, and then the other book. So what was there about Tod? Now, Lieutenant Colonel, he wasn't always a Lieutenant Colonel. He starts off life as a 17-year-old in India, but he leaves India as a captain and then gets his promotion after going back from India. Was born on the 20th of March in 1782. And he came out to India at the age of 17 in the Bengal Army in 1799. So he didn't come armed with a university degree or anything of that sort. What he learned of India was on the job, so to speak. And then at some point fairly early on in his career, he was part of an escort attached to the resident who was with Scindia. So 1812 to 17 was that period there. And there are things he's got is with his script, which say Gwalior 1815. He also then went on to work for the intelligence department of the East India Company and was of assistance during the campaign in Rajasthan, Rajputana as it still was. So Rajasthan, which is roughly the size and shape of France, give or take a few states here and there, was being referred to in the British documents as Rajputana, the land of the Rajputs. And at one point had 22 of the quote-unquote native princely Indian states. Certainly that was the case when the states merged with India, joined India in August 1947. But I don't need to come up to that period in this talk. But really what happens with Tod is he's been there, done that, he's still young. In 1818, he gets appointed as the political agent, this is on behalf of the East India Company, for the states of Western Rajputana. And basically his job is to make sure that the Rajas, the chieftains, do what they are meant to be doing. Just for general information, this is roughly the time period where treaties have been signed by the East India Company and different princely kingdoms of this area, a process which starts off in 1803 and then carries on till 1823. So 1818 is the year a lot of them signed these treaties with the East India Company, with Tod being one of the people encouraging them to do this. Now, he's collecting all this material, and I'm going to take a jump to come to that now, before boring you silly with the biographical details. But he's eventually writes about the geography and the history of Rajputana and Central India and the history of the clans who are ruling them. And then he returned to England in 1823. So he spends about 23 years of his life in India, not all of that in Rajasthan, but he leaves his heart behind in Rajasthan or Rajputana. He's using the term Rajasthan for the first time, by the way, and I will probably return to that unless I go off on a totally different tangent. So somewhere in his preface, Tod also said that he got from the library of the Rana of Udaipur their sacred volumes, the Purans, and he put them before a body of Pandits presided over by eventually his own guru, Jati Gyan Chandra. And he got all these genealogies of the solar and lunar dynasties and historical figures. So let me come to Tod's family a little bit. So let me talk a little bit about Tod in that order. Little more about his work with the East India Company, but I think you've got the gist of it. And then about the collections he made, but then also on the impact he has on the politics and parliamentary debates in the UK or in Great Britain, it was still great, after he returns from India, of course, and then his influence even today. So I'm going to kind of keep coming to those things. But what do we know about Todd? So at 17, he didn't come armed with university degrees. Probably what languages he spoke, he learned here, other than, of course, his own native language, English. His family, they were Scottish. They had strong Scottish connections. The mother's family seems to have moved to the US because his parents got married in New York. His father was also called James, and his mother was Mary Heatley. And James the senior, our Colonel James Todd's father, and his uncle were indigo planters in India. So there was already this India connection. But interestingly, James Tod, the youngest father, had already left India before James was born. Now, as if having one side linked to India is not enough, Mary Heatley's brothers, his maternal uncles, were members of the Bengal Civil Service. So I think that was probably what made this decision easy. What do you do? Young boy has a career, send him off somewhere where he can make a career for himself in the East India Company. So why am I going to be talking about Todd today? See, Todd actually is not a trained historian, but his books continue to be used by historians. He is not a political scientist, but his analysis and recommendations at that time, when the Charter of the East India Company was coming up for renewal in Parliament, was used in Parliament to discuss the policies in India. And they were still at that point going in for and eventually said that there would be the doctrine of lapse. And Todd was against it. He had a different approach to Indians and to India. But again, let me not jump the gun too much. Now, he's not even an anthropologist, but his notes and field observations continue to be very useful. He's one of the few people who, when he writes about a community, is giving you detailed notes on them, particularly in the book he does on his return from when he's leaving India and Rajasthan, and he travels through Gujarat and he takes the slow trail to what was then still Bombay to take the boat home to London. Now, Todd becomes the first librarian of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland when it is set up in March 1823. But hello, Todd wasn't a librarian either. And the RAS was set up by a Sanskrit scholar and an Indologist by the name of Colebrook, whose automatic choice was, Todd is back. He's been writing on various issues from India. So he becomes a librarian. Now, Todd also, there are more pluses to him. He's not a surveyor or a geographer. He's not a member of the Survey of India. But then there isn't a Survey of India when he starts doing his map making. And he does solid, well trained by others. He does his solid map making. And his maps, especially for the area that he calls Central India, which remains Central India, it's a term that Todd was publicizing, remains crucial for the British military movements. So he's got his plus points there as well. Now, what Todd wrote about are annals, are stories that he's collecting as he travels through Rajasthan. And the nationalist historians who come after Todd has been dead and buried for quite some time, many of them pick on characters that Todd is already focused on because they help in kind of nation building and they help in talking about valorous Indians and sacrificing figures like Pannadhai, like Maharana Pratap, and in many different languages, Todd's stories get translated and become, again, a focal point there. So Todd leaves his mark on a lot of things. And when it comes to something like, why are we even talking about Todd today? Because, if you think of like a lot of my history colleagues say, he's got things wrong. He says the poet Saint Mira was Kumbha's wife, and he was wrong there. And he says this is valorous, this beautiful, self-sacrificing Padmini, whose husband's name he gets wrong, and he calls him Bhim Singh. Now again, he's got that wrong. But people also say, he talks about Prithviraj Chauhan, Prithviraj III, and his court bard, Chand Bardai, as if they were contemporaries, which a lot of people feel they were not. So they say, Todd gets nothing right. And yet, that's not really the case. Because prior to Todd, a lot of this information was again locked up in genealogies, in other books. It was not being talked about the way we talk about him today. So again, I'm not still answering that question about why are we talking about Todd? I mean, why are we even talking today? Let's wait till the end and see where we come to at that point. So let me just say that by the time in 1818, Todd starts living in Rajputana for a significant period, and he goes away in 1822 and 23, very short period in a working life. But during this period, he's not here as a historian. He's here as the political agent with the duties of administration and administrative reform. But alongside all of this, he's gathering up manuscripts. He's not always stealing them, by the way. We will come to that too. But let me, in case we don't do it adequately, say he gets gifted a lot of these manuscripts. And it's not, oh, gifted, ha, ha, ha. It's gifted because he's keen, he shows his interest. And so a lot of the rulers say, right, get this set of this copied out for the man. He seems interested enough. But he gets these manuscripts and then he collects, he finds coins, he gets legends, he gets contemporary paintings, he makes maps, he commissions sketches. His relative, Captain Waugh, Patrick Waugh, is part of his entourage, one of the few British with him. So Patrick Waugh starts making these architectural drawings of places that they go to. And all of these become core of Todd's monumental work, which we now talk about. So Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan, or the Central and Western Rajput States of India. First volume comes out in 1829 and the second one in 1832, or the one which comes out after his death, which I abbreviated to Travels in Western India, but the full title, Travels in Western India, embracing a visit to the sacred mounts of the Jains and the most celebrated shrines of Hindu faith between Rajputana and the Indus, with an account of the ancient city of Neherwala, a mouthful. But these three two-volume sets, so call it one if you like, and Travels, they go a long way, and they did go a long way then too. So they went a long way in shaping and influencing views about India and Indians in Britain and in Europe, and then in British India and princely India, right up to 1947, notwithstanding the fact that there have been more critical studies on Todd. Todd still remains this larger than life figure for a lot of people. Now, let me very quickly, basically just to show you I've done my little homework, talk about some of the books which are not talking about Todd's collection so much as talking about Todd the man and what his mission, so to speak, becomes, and analyzing him and his role. One of the major ones that I can think of, and there are not that many, is Jason Freitag's Serving Nation, Serving Empire, which came out from Leiden in 2009. The full title is Serving Nation, Serving Empire, James Tod and the Rajputs of Rajasthan. And then there are innumerable essays and books, one book written by Suzanne Hober Rudolph and Lloyd I. Rudolph, who first discovered Todd prior to coming to India in a Land Rover in 1956. So they all had already read their Todd, and then they continued to read Todd and interpret Todd and get their students hooked onto Todd. the University of Chicago, basically, from the 1960s onwards. And then, of course, my colleague and friend, Dr. Giles Tillotson, edited a Marg volume with a lot of very eminent writers in it, which was James Tod's Rajasthan, the historian and his collections. That's 2007. One more that I will mention, I'm sure there are lots of others. Norway Peabody's written on Tod, different facets of Tod. But Florence desouza in 2015, Manchester University Press published her Knowledge, Mediation and Empire, James Tod's Journeys Amongst the Rajputs. And now it's like full circle. So either the book is out and I've missed it, or the book will be out, and COVID has delayed the publication. But finally, a version of Todd's original illustrated Annals and Antiquities is going to be coming out in time for the anniversary of the Royal Asiatic Society, which Dr. Norbe Peabody and Dr. Ramya Srinivasan are editing. So that'll have illustrations, really looking forward to that. But all of these ones that I'm talking about talk about Tod and his knowledge exchanges with contemporaries. In different ways, they will also talk about Todd's romanticism being different to James Mill's utilitarianism. They'll talk about relationship with the British government in India and discussions in Parliament. And I probably will not be able to do justice on all of that. But what is important is that Tod becomes more talked about post his brief spell in Rajasthan on the basis of what he is writing about the Indians, about the Rajputs, about how they deserve to be governing, and about ways of dealing with the Indians as equals, which is not gelling well with his bosses. So if any of you have issues with your immediate boss, just remember, lots of people have been there, including Tod, whose immediate boss was David Octoloni, the resident at Delhi. And things got so bad, toxic, that eventually Todd's role was being reduced. His physical control over lots of places in Rajasthan was being reduced, and he thought it was best to resign. Also, his health was failing, and we have evidence of that also. So staying with Tod, and I can probably, if there are questions, come back to a lot of the insights on what was happening. Maybe let me also just mention that in 1831-32, in their recommendations to the British Parliament about the renewal of the East India Company's charter, the views of Mill and Tod were actually poles apart. And especially when it came to the system of subsidiary alliances or the doctrine of lapse, on issues like the levying of land taxes and collection of duties, and about the relations of the East India Company with, here I do my inverted American style, native Indian employees and native Indian princely states. But I think they all thought that they were kind of nation building or world building or whatever. To an extent, you can say that Tod probably had an ethos of romanticism with a utilitarian agenda, if one can have such a thing. And just before Tod leaves India, that's his kind of final thing, we find that his illnesses have actually grown, and whether it's because, mind you, he'd been in India a long time, but whether it is also official pressures or whether this thing of being ill is really a way of building the stage, building the scenario for leaving India for good. But he kept good relations with everyone, and his dispatches on the Maid tribes, on the Jaipur succession in 1819, quota affairs, all of this show that he wanted to understand the background and motivations of the people he was working with, of the leaders, and he was winning disapproval all along. Now, there's so much to cover for Tod, I will at the end show some images, not that many, so don't hold your breath. But I won't try it now because I'll probably just be stuck with something which I won't be able to come back to, being technologically so well versed in everything that I'm a super genius. Let me come to the Royal Asiatic Society and what is known as the Todd collection of Indian manuscripts, which I didn't put my grubby paws on them. I put on gloves, but then that wasn't working so well, so I washed my hands. But I have had my paws on some of the manuscripts. So Todd was not just the librarian, he was also one of the founder members of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland, which I will be calling RAS or just the Royal Asiatic Society. And he had this position of librarian from 1823 to 31. When Todd died in 1835, he left to the Royal Asiatic Society all his Oriental books, his manuscripts, and the coins of whichever coins that the society did not have duplicates. And they were about, now I'm saying about, there's a reason, we can have a question on it, or I can maybe come around to, again, explaining that. But they were about 170 manuscripts in Sanskrit, Prakrit, Hindi, and Gujarati. And when a catalogue of the Todd collection of Indian manuscripts was made in 1938 by L.D. Barnett, they said that the Todd collection's manuscripts were Sanskrit, Prakrit, Old Gujarati, Rajasthani / Hindi in the Devanagari script, Punjabi, and Marathi. Now, some of the material that Todd had taken to Britain, which is not in the Royal Asiatic Society, but is very spectacular indeed, includes something like the Maharana Jagat Singh Ramayana, which was presented to King George IV, then went to the British Museum and is a prized possession that has been published. Rowley brought out a version of several of the Jagat Singh Ramayans. I think there were 12 copies of the painted Ramayana made in Maharana Jagat Singh of Mewar's time. And Todd was gifted one by his contemporary, Maharana Bhim Singh, who was his patron plus his friend. He got a lot of manuscripts from Bhim Singh Ji. He left his horse, his favorite steed, with the Maharana. So it was a relationship of friendship. He also took back, besides the works like the Ramayana, other paintings, some of which are in various collections, Royal Asiatic and others, copperplate inscriptions, coins, of course, I think I have mentioned, and other artifacts, not all of which are with the Royal Asiatic Society. A lot of the artifacts went to the South Kensington Museum, which then eventually became part of the Victoria and Albert Museum. And then somebody will track and tell you where. Now, like a lot of people of that period, this is very much the Victorian era in that sense of upbringing and everything. So everyone's interested in everything. It's like you don't just pick up a coin, you become an enthusiast. So our amateur numismatist Todd, among other things, he finds specimens of early Indo-Greek and Bactrian coins from India, and he describes these. And then these coins are now being used to build up all kinds of chronologies with the British Museum. Now, out of the manuscripts, some are incomplete, but they were and most of them are genealogies. Some are religious texts, some deal with astronomy, and some are on grammar, morality tales. There's even iconography. And there some 21 more texts were added to Todd's collection. This is Punjabi written in the Gurmukhi script, Marathi written in the Modi script, and they were given by various named donors, including, they were of course put in the Todd collection of Indian manuscripts since they were pertaining to India. And these are specifically marked. Among this kind of extra material which came in are 8 separate segments or cantos of the Prithviraj Raso by Chanbardai, and these were given to the Royal Asiatic Society by Sir Henry Myers Eliot. And at that point, I didn't chase up enough to find out whether this was part of a Todd collection that had gone somewhere else and had come back into the collection. The reason I say this is, as I'm speaking, I recall sitting in the what used to be the India Office Library collection, now the British Library collection, and in the European section, European manuscript section, there is Todd's handwritten in pencil, hand transcribed copy of the Annals of Jaisalmer State, which went to somebody else, perhaps someone in the family, I cannot now recall, and then eventually get donated back. And so at least, the work gets back into safe custody, so to speak. Now, language, yes, we are covering, but the majority of these manuscripts, which you can see if you go onto the Royal Asiatic Society website, and you'll be able to get a broad idea, are Sanskrit manuscripts, Prakrit manuscripts, many of which are on Jainism, but not only on Jainism. Then there are ones on Rajasthan, in which the script is Devanagari, but the language can be of the different Mewari, Hadoti, which I found almost impossible to read. And then there are manuscripts in Gujarati, or even in 2 or more languages. Some are illustrated. Among the earliest, we have copies of the 14th century, which are on palm leaf. And then there are various copies of Qurans, and I'm not going to go into all of that details, but there are also some beautifully illustrated manuscripts. Now, out of the ones that he collected from various rulers when he went to various places are genealogies. So there is one on the Rathors, which he got from the Jodhpur area. Maharaja Man Singh gave him some. Then there's a Kachavari Vanchavli. And what is interesting is that their Todd collection has a few manuscripts from the old collection of the Jaipur rulers, the Kachwaha rulers of Dhundar state. And there seems to be no reasonable explanation, because Todd didn't come to Jaipur, as to how he got it. But there is a story, it's kind of urban legend, that half of Maharaja Jagat Singh of Jaipur's library was given to somebody else, and it was probably sold in the market. So he's got a few in which says Library of the Jaipur Maharaja, and Todd's writing says Gwalior, 1815. So it predates his coming to this part of the world. There's a genealogy of the Sisodias, there are of the Jaisalmer Bhakis, several. Then there are also translations of Persian manuscripts into Rajasthani. Then, of course, the Raso. But I think maybe, yes, very much so, the Prithviraj Raso. There were 5 volumes in which Todd was translating Chanbardai's Prithviraj Raso, and he believed in the story he got. So this is where I do one of my tangents, and a lot of people say, see, he gets this wrong because he's not doing his dating, but he never claimed to be a historian or to be doing relative dating of any sort. He was taking at face value things on India that were being told to him, because he was enamored of the history of the Rajputs and of the area he was in, of the grand antiquity of these people meaning the people he was dealing with. I didn't mean the Rajputs as a specific category here, I just mean the people. What he knows about very early India, he appreciates this kind of continuity with a break, and then another, something else takes the story forward. He got interested in the category which chronicles the exploits of specific individuals. So Prithviraj Raso, story of Prithviraj, Khumman Raso by Dalpat Vijay, about Mewar's Rana Khumman and his descendants, Ratan Raso, which is a tale of Rao Ratan Singh of Ratlam, who was a contemporary of Emperor Aurangzeb, and Ratan Singh of Ratlam died at the Battle of Dharmatpur, where Jaswant Singh of Mewar was the Marwar was the ruler. So that is more like a historical eulogy to him. Now, lots of short stories. So Baat Johiari, Raja Kavatri Vartiya, Sada Bhati Ribat, Jagdev Puar Ribat. These are stories. Dhola Marwani Ribat. There are also some unnumbered manuscripts, which my feeling, having examined them, was they were probably part of the original Todd collection, but then they were put somewhere else. Because I examined a couple of these, two of which are long genealogical rolls, numbered as RAS Oriental 1, RAS Oriental 2 in the kind of Hindi Devanagari script. And says, third one is on the Bhati Rajputs. One of them says, it was a genealogy of the Jain monks, it says on the cover in English, but it's not. It's a genealogy of the Sisodias of Mewar. Another one is, I will show an image. It's very interesting. It's a Hindu almanac, is what it says in Todd's writing, presented by Colonel Todd, 7th April, 1832. And this is illustrated in red, vermilion, green, yellow, gray, blue, black, white, written in black. It seems to be like a Varshfal or a annual almanac, and there's writing there which makes it that it is linked with the year 1818. I have a feeling it was perhaps given to Todd as his kind of birth almanac for that year, and he brought it and gave it to the museum, the Royal Asiatic, as a souvenir. That I promise I will show you an image of, but I think I need to get a little move on. So how does he get all of these? I mean, did the Rana of Mewar present everything in Mewar library to him? Obviously not. As I said, once they find that Todd is interested, and Todd spends his work day trying to do administration and having, following and writing letters to his boss's equivalent. And then he tries to spend as much time as possible learning various Indian languages and getting things copied out. But what really appeals to him is being out in the field. And he has to do a lot of that. Traveling was over horseback, going from one of the states that he held to another of the states that he held. So Bundi Kota he goes to, Jaisalmer he goes to, Mewar is where his base is. What have I left out? Jodhpur he definitely travels to. He's written on Bikaner also. So several were copied for Todd. Each time he shows interest, some ruler or other says, have these copied out of our library. And others were presented. Now I'm going to give you a few. So Mewar sources tell us that Maharana Bhim Singh ordered many texts to be copied from his personal library. So Todd manuscript number 23, which has got many Rajasthani baths or vats, as in Baat Karna stories, and is a continuation from manuscript number 122. So manuscript 23, 122, have a notation in English, copied from material taken from the Saraswati Bhandar library of Maharana Bhim Singh of Mewar under the supervision of Yati Shri Gyan Chandra. And then he got about a dozen manuscripts, we are told, of historical importance from the Saraswati Bhandar collection of the Maharana of Mewar libraries. And he was invited to take these away. And one of these is a copy, I mentioned the Kuman Raso a few minutes ago. And it's in this, the words Kuman Raso in Rajasthani on the flyleaf with Todd's handwritten edition of the words Kuman Rupak from H.H. the Rana's library, Udaipur, May 31, 1819, J. full stop Todd in English. So as he acquires, we also know that. He then says, Todd wrote in his volume 1 of the Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan that Maharaja Man Singh of Marwar had copies of his family's history made and presented to Todd, which was subsequently deposited in the library of the Royal Asiatic Society. And then little further in the text, Todd says, I was given 6 metrical chronicles of Raja Moun's house, 2 of which he says he later translated, in return for which Todd says he transcribed later and sent to the Marwar ruler a copy of Farishta's History of the Mohammedan Power in India and of the Khulasat-ul-Tawarikh. And then again, there's a copy of Ratan Raso, Todd manuscript 142, which says presented in English, it says presented to me by Raja Mon Singh of Marwar. So again, then there's another one, Vijay Vilas, in which he says from the Raja's library when I was in Marwar, signed J. Tod. Another one just says from Jaipur Library, Gwalior, 1815, James Tod. The name is there in full. So lots of things happening as Todd was collecting. Now, I want to bring up 2 letters here, and I think I've taken enough time and will probably be winding up. So he did collect from many sources, but at one point, Colonel Colin Mackenzie, another of the East India Company people, had written to him asking for some material. And Todd writes to Colonel Colin Mackenzie, 24th February, 1821. So a century and just over a month earlier. And that throws light on the history and geography and architecture of the places. But I'm going to quote a bit. So Todd says, when I think of the date of your letter, I am led to use the phrase of the Indian bard, in the mire of shame. But I have one excuse, one apology, that every wish, nay, every duty has been abandoned to one's object, my public duty. And such has been this, and so shifting, so many new ones following in the course of each other, that I can truly affirm I have never been master of my own time for 2 days since the political duties of these states have been entrusted to me. Shall I make a confession? Upward of 2 years elapsed without my writing to my own parents. Not to a relation breathing did I for near 3 years acquaint with the important scenes I had been bearing a part in. Yet was there enough to have stimulated to this exertion men of less vanity than me. The fact, therefore, is that from excess of business, preying in bad health, I looked on everything as a task. Yet I could go on collecting. I could prosecute my favorite inquiries into the olden times. I could heap up to my old stock, but I had no time for selection or for arrangement. This still continues. My inquiries are unabated, but I have not a single tract, a single essay on any one subject, except on a Greek coin, and that already sent to Mr. Adams. How or in what manner shall I attempt to reply to your letter? How enter the interminable field of Hindu antiquity? Whither will it lead me? Where can I leave off? It is plunging me into a labyrinth of my own, but I have provided no clue for my exit, and I may be left in the darkness of my own ideas without enlightening you. I can't say with the Chauhan bard of Shakambari, and he means Chand Bardai here, I can't say with the Chauhan bard of Shakambari, beautiful shall be my tale, subduing the heart, twining around it like the ivy bale of love, as the gods churn the ocean. So shall I, the words of speech, to extract gems of my song. And this is like a quote, so he's already done his translation here. I entered these territories with every advantage. From long previous acquaintance, I knew what to inquire for and when to inquire. And I believe I have left little for the gleaner in the fields, either of history, geography, or antiquity. I have corrected materially the geography from various journeys, regularly managed and corrected by observation. In all these, I had parties to copy all inscriptions I met with, and had men employed in each flank of my march. At each place I halted at, I collected. And then it's not clear, but it looks like inspiration of bards. The inspiration of bards that made them tell of provincial pomp and tournament, and thus secured many fragments which afterwards gave me a clue to procure the entire work. Todd goes on, I never in these cases met with a tale having local historical reference that I did not particularly hear out, and generally encanted in my journal the pith of. Every cairn I met had its little history inserted, and every old inhabitant of every stage questioned as to the extent of tradition. And he still goes on. I, at the same time, hunted at every place for old coins and was often successful, and I passed few ancient temples without taking drawings from them and their paths. All of this is that letter from the European collection of the British Library. I tried to pay attention also to the mineralogy and made a few ecological remarks where I could without exposing the shallowness of my knowledge. I have a large selection which I have conveyed at great expense to this. It would take many carts to move them, though I intend to send the whole to the society one of these days. Some are of a very uncommon character, to which my old guru, a Jain doctor, a DD, has at great length found a key, and one is so old as about 776 and corroborates my notions regarding the origins of the present family of Mewar. If you think this is long, people, I wrote it out by hand when I was transcribing it. We didn't have digital at that point. Still more to come, but I'm winding up. I've had coins from some of the old mounds, but reduced to a faithful copy, tangible and illegible. I had made many journeys myself, but that only at that early period found it impracticable to do the work minutely, but had often to make retreat at night to the jungles and follow the stars without a guide. Yet personal labor, always on foot, made up for what was almost otherwise indispensable. I visited almost all the capitals and filled up immediate spaces by information. But I had found one or two men to bring me intelligence in such a manner that I am often astonished at my own accuracy. But I was an enthusiast in the matter, though it has deeply injured my constitution. I was engaged in correcting my map when business required the attendance of my assistant at Kota, and all is again at a standstill. So then he goes on about more of this that he has, and he says, but until more is secured in my grasp than now, I cannot allow my mind that leisure for other subjects which they require to attain anything like interest or unity. All I possess are mere beacons. Even my coins I have never arranged. My cabinet is a true picture of chaotic darkness, like our Indian genealogies, where the sweet substances mixed with that of Kali are so metallic representatives. Now, I donate 4 hours daily to my amusement in this day, but it is making up for the lost time in translation of old books and manuscripts. And this, while I have an interval of good health, to which I have long been a stranger. And then we are ending this with these last 4 lines, but a little more to wind up. I am too vain, however, to put my candle under a bushel, and the light shall appear, whether as a rushlight, a patna batti. But I must put a stop to this, which I have tired you, and it ill suits the gravity of antiquarian researches. So he is busy doing what he loves to do in his spare time, and obviously doesn't get much of it. I found that line of, it's been 2 years since I wrote to my own family, a little poignant. I wasn't sure. His collection has got a lot of handwritten copies of inscriptions he found, of important paperwork. So all of this is available at the Royal Asiatic Society. It can be worked on, contemporary correspondence, and a whole lot of other things. Now these, as I say, for those who question his ability to have used this material, they say, how could he read all of this? And some of my colleagues have also said that, he says he didn't have any Indian languages. So Todd says, I have extracted the essence, ansh, of many works in prose and verse in all dialects, from the Devbani, the Sanskrit, so-called by preeminence language of the gods, to the Ankut Bhasha, the Doric of Merpat, or the honeyed words of Braj. My tutor is an adept in everyone, and that is Yati Gyan Chandra. the Saraswati, of which is the Punjabi, the Magadhi from Bihar, Gujarati, etc., etc. And I understand the Rangra and blunder through all. Now, you know, when he says this blunder through all, I've had people say to me, see, he's saying not blunder through all, he doesn't know his languages. And yet this is this very kind of self-deprecatory British way of, you know, thoda bahut aata hai. So I blundered through all. He obviously knew more than thoda. And if you look at his translations, you will realize that. Now, right at the end, he says in another letter to Mackenzie, my inquiries are unabated. Where will it lead me? I have speculations on all, and much detailed matter written while each subject was warm in my mind, but still little more than the germ. All that I possess, therefore, are mere beacons, and though some individually have attained the size of mountains, there is no chain, no continuity. I could present nothing as a whole. So now he's waiting for the light to appear, and the light eventually appears and leaves us with this 2-volume account. But the Annals and Antiquities. But the final is, Todd said, still the only 2 letters to Mackenzie. Could I have perfect seclusion for a few months? And he's writing this in India, in Udaipur, which is when he wanted this seclusion. Could I have perfect seclusion for a few months? I could perhaps give a local habitation and a name to this chaotic map. There is an island in the lake of Udaipur, in a corner of which is a beautiful Gothic building erected for Prince Khurram when he fell from Jahangir's wrath in taking sanctuary with the Rana. Here, with no companion but the stork, I should allow my ideas to flow, and with such recollection as the place inspired, and a little enthusiasm still left in me, I would tell of the worthies when history was in my mind's eye, of what these faithless fortunes were, have destroyed, and have, when even hope was fled of their recovery. But all this requires leisure and a mind at rest, not to be disturbed by daily perplexities. Todd was not to find that leisure until after his return to Britain, and even then perhaps not a mind at rest, free from daily perplexities. But I like to think in my mind that as he sat at his desk in England, maybe his mind's eye carried him back to that Udaipur island, which is the Jagmandir in Udaipur, where he had once yearned to work, with such recollections as the place inspired, as he wrote his annals on the Rajasthan that he had so obviously become part of. I would like to just share some of the images that I have. Sorry, I waste a lot of people's times doing this, but here we go. If nothing happens, just tell me and something will. Nothing seems to be happening just yet, but have patience. All right, James Tod's Rajasthan. Just to give you all of this, no, not all. This is not mine. It's of Pinterest, and that's Todd on his hathi. That's Guruji on another hathi. This is the one I was telling you about, which is an almanac in various different colors. It is 1818. Another quick image of it. To part of your screen, you'll see the pasted piece of paper, which is in Todd's writing. I didn't dare turn it around because you wouldn't get an idea. But if you could care to kind of strain your neck, you can see the Colonel and then J. Todd in his handwriting. From Todd's original Annals and Antiquities. Now, what my colleague and friend Giles Tillotson has told me, Dr. Giles Tillotson, that what Captain Patrick Waugh had drawn out for him, then went to an etching expert in Britain and they smoothen some certain lines and others get smoothed out in the transcribing. But we still have an image of, this is with permission. This is one of the maps from the Royal Asiatic Society Library, put there to say, along with his other work, our man was also making maps. This is a later print, but he was doing this. One of the manuscripts that he talks about is a collection on omens, and it's got colored diagrams. And again, it says in Todd's writing, Shukunavali or History of Omens from the Library of Raval Mool Raj of Jaisalmer. Copying finished, V. Samvat is Vikram Samvat, 1875, Chaitra Sudhi 7, Brigu 0, followed by tables, diagrams, pictures of birds, rules for interpreting omens, same being in the same hand as that of the Shakunavali. It's 40 pages, it's on paper, and it's Rajasthani Hindi. So there is a vast collection that we have there. But most of this vast collection would have been in Todd's mind as he perhaps dreamt of Jag Mandir that we see here on this last image, and perhaps dreamt of the days when he was younger. Maybe he never went away in his mind's eye. He always stayed back here. And certainly Todd and his writings remains more than larger than life in the lives of a lot of people here. So this is my little adding to my two bits to James Tod and James Todd's Rajasthan. Thank you for this. I'm going to stop sharing now. Over to you, Sindhuri.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rima. I think it was a very, very interesting talk, and we have a lot of questions that have come in the comments. So, without any delay, I'll just read it out to you. So here, Debajuti Chakrabarti asks, some of the incidents were covered by James Tod. Haven't any historical evidence, such as Padmini and the process of accession Hamir? What do you think of them?
Yeah. So what Todd says all along is he's getting information from informants. And we need to also keep in mind that there are certain studies made prior to his time. Nancy writes about things, but not everybody has access to the level of material we have today. So for Padmini, to this day, the argument still goes on. You know, did she exist? Did she not? Accession, somewhere somebody's written that the which of them is she referring to here? Accession of any of the Maharanas in particular?
It just says accession of Hamir. That's all.
Hamir, yeah. So again, he picks from sources made available to him. Again, I think the second of the volume comes out in 1832. And if you think of the time it takes for anyone to recheck their work, I don't know how much of his work he would have edited, re-edited. So yes, there are inaccuracies. But then, as I said at the beginning, he never claimed to be a historian. So we are kind of giving him the historian's hat and then wondering why he's not fitting the bill or fitting his head into that. So I hope that helps you with the answer to an extent. It's not the perfect answer.
Okay. Sangeeta Sharma here asks, what do you think about his over-glorification of Mewar as opposed to other Rajputana states? His epithets of Sacha Darbar and Jhuta Darbar for the states of Mewar and Jaipur, respectively.
Okay. I think, Sangeeta, you're absolutely right that he is glorifying, whether we go to over or not. He's definitely, he lives somewhere, and he is, because he's empathetic, is why he's running into trouble with his bosses. If he had been just another distant hakim ruling over the place, or doing his duty, he may have been more historically correct in his interpretations, perhaps, but he would have been a less colorful figure. He doesn't hide his bias for the Rajputs, particularly for Mewar, but he's not saying to anyone not to check on the history of the other places. So he's spending a lot of time hearing these stories and he starts believing in them. And that is not to say that most of them are wrong, it is just that they become uppermost in his mind. And you will find that, you know, when you research something, whatever you're researching at that point takes over your life. And whoever you work with, you tend to have some form of empathy with it. On one of these recent things, we've had a world of onlines in the last year. And talking to another writer, I said, how do you manage to be unbiased about the biographies you do? And he said, it takes an effort because the tendency is to become sympathetic. So yes, there is a very much so, there is a pro Mewar bias. But it's almost like, you know, there was a chaotic situation in Mewar. He's helped sort things out. He's made sure that the nobles are in a certain position vis-a-vis the king, which is where he believes his own logical thinking says it should be that way. And we take it from there. So I don't have to justify what he's done, and I do agree with you on that one.
The next question here is by Sonia. She asks, apart from Annals and Antiquities, what are other writings that Todd had done?
Okay, I think there are about 5 or 9 essays which are in the journals of the Royal Asiatic Society. He picks on different facets, and they were kind of peer-reviewed journals at that time. So again, I would suggest that I'm not sure if the chat box will work, but you can put it out that they can check out the Royal Asiatic Society of Britain's website, and you will come across the names of those other articles, particularly of that Bactrian coin that he's done. He also did his travelogue on Western India, where again he's describing the countryside, he's describing the people he meets. He's talking a little bit about the temples and shrines and the kingdoms that he's passing. And maybe if he had lived, he could have had more and more of these annals on every one of the states that he was dealing with. There's certainly that much material. And if you think of the manuscripts, you know, even if he couldn't read all those scripts, even the ones on history, he could have, like with all of us, if you have a book inside you, you probably have 20, but you only do 1 or 2 or 20. Okay, next, please.
Sorry. Sonam here asks, where is Todd's personal library and his collection now?
Okay, so his personal library and his collection, at his death, they did go to the Royal Asiatic Society, and the Royal Asiatic Society has moved house. Its building has shifted over time, but the collection has stayed with the Royal Asiatic Society. Now, this goes for his paper collection, but everything is not there. There are some of his manuscripts which he's gifted, which are listed. Lots of his personal notes have not yet been tracked down. And as I mentioned, 1 or 2 things are in the British Library collection. So this is not in the British Museum collection or the Royal Asiatic collection, but in a European manuscripts of the section of the British Library collection. So for all we know, we might still find some things in Mewar, perhaps because among other places, the Rajasthan Vidyapeeth deemed university has a building Todd had used. Another building is the residency that Todd had used. So we may still have papers by him somewhere in India also.
Okay. Sangeeta Sharma again asks, do you see him as an Orientalist scholar who speaks from a position of superiority, and his sympathetic and appreciative discourse was simply another imperialistic trope of subjugation?
Do I personally see him as someone speaking from superiority? Probably not. You have to see the flack he is getting from not being distant enough from the people. He's meant to be ruling these natives, even if he is eulogizing them. That's all very well, but somewhere you need to be saying that they are inferior. And Todd doesn't seem to be wanting to say that. And the professors Rudolph, in their last book on James Tod, were actually talking about this romanticism in Todd, but also his very strong Scottish identity, which prevents him being as much of a monarchist and an apologist for British rule as maybe somebody else writing similar works could have been. So I don't know if he's an Orientalist. I don't know how he would have been if he had stayed on in India, not gone back in 1822, 23. How would he have been if he had taken a much more active political role? Because they didn't want to hear from him. They wanted to subdue his voice. And basically his voice, if they had, as they say later on, that if they had listened to Todd's analysis, and Todd is not the only one, on how you deal with your natives, their need for 1857 may not have happened, because there would have been a different policy towards the people who are being ruled. So maybe actually I would like to say, because since I'm assuming this is Professor Sangeeta Sharma from Rajasthan University asking those questions, and maybe she would like to have a workshop or a discussion on this facet, maybe looking at Todd and looking at some of the others. Just to carry on that, a lot of people who come after him and write on history, like Kaviraj Shamaldas and others, are really using the framework that Todd is giving them and using less of the pre-existing framework of history writing that Nancy has in his Khyat. And that could be that Nancy's Khyat is known, but not so well accessible to everybody writing on history, including some of the senior doyens like Ojaji and others. Whereas this work, because it comes back to India in its published form, does get talked about more. I would also be interested in I've forgotten when the first translation is done into Hindi. Because, as I said, a lot of the stories get translated into different languages soon after Todd's life. So Rajir Kahini and all of these, which become part of what, not Rabindranath Tagore, but one of his, I think his brother perhaps, or his nephew, translate these stories. Yes. So all of that tradition, when I was growing up, we would find a lot of people coming to see Jaipur with books that they were holding about Rajasthan. There would be family groups traveling, mainly from Bengal and Gujarat, but other parts of India. And in many of them, there were these stories being told and retold, not all of which are by Todd, but several of which have been highlighted by Todd. But yes, so does he look at us from a point of superiority? In my opinion, no. But it would be interesting to explore this further.
All right. The next question we have here is by Aparna Andhare. She asks, do we know if Todd interacted with women directly? Did he have any access to a zanana?
Okay. So you do need to remember, or if you pick up a copy, Todd was dealing with the state of Bundi, and the ruler of Bundi made Todd his son's guardian. Todd therefore becomes the Rakhi Bhai of the Queen of Bundi, and she gets widowed very early, which is when the role of the guardianship is really taken up seriously by Todd. And so he has a lot of communication with his Rakhi sister, then later the Queen Mother of Bundi, mostly through Parda, because perhaps if he had been Indian, that Parda may not have, that being a Rakhi brother might still have been adequate. It's nothing to do with his being Christian. I think it's to do with being a foreigner. But the conversations that they have are verbal conversations across a curtain. And he says that I have letters by her. So, he's actually speaking up for the fact that the women are educated and they may not have their formal R's, but they know spiritual aspects, they know their history, they know the scriptures, and they learn how to write letters. They know their mathematics after a fashion, because when they are handling the forts and the storage aspect, they need to be able to calculate how many days of food we have. So whether they sit and do their mathematical tables, which they don't, they know how to do these calculations. We don't get too much information from other places, but perhaps because, as I said, how much is being left out. But this is a very clear one where he talks about the fact that this is what Rajput women are capable of and are um, educated and erudite, and this clear example. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Um, I think we have the last question here. Dr. Suvi Kanchan asks, why is Todd considered a romantic writer?
Right. I think I think it comes from the stories that build up around him, even when his book is released. He thinks of himself in the vein of Sir Walter Scott. That Scottish connection is there. He thinks of the Rajputs as being, the ballads of the Rajputs. So that kind of, and then what he is writing about is he picks out the tales and he talks about valor, honor, words which meant a lot both in the Britain of his generation, but also in India and most cultures at that point. He also talks about a woman he obviously did not meet because she was already long dead, but he goes on about the peerless Tara, the star, and she is the wife of Prince Prithviraj, which different Prithviraj, not Chauhan, a Mewar prince who was the eldest, could have had the throne. Um, Squabble between brothers, another one gets it. But she follows her husband everywhere and is able to ride on horses and fight. Now that all of that makes a tale that is romantic, and he intersperses his work with these. So when he's writing, it's not he's not writing for a history student, so he's not analyzing it in that way, but he is writing a jolly good yarn. He's putting in a tale. So he will talk about Tara, then he will talk about someone else, or he will talk about when these brothers, Prithviraj and um, Sangha and the others, go to meet a lady who's able to tell fortunes, and there's a tiger skin, and they sit at different places, and she's an oracle. So all of that makes for this romanticized thing, but also his outlook on the Rajputs is he is talking about them as special, and I use the word Rajput. I think Rajput, yes, because they are the politically dominant group, but I think it applies to India, to the Indians he's dealing with. Whoever he talks about, it's always figures that are glamorous, valorous, romantic, and that's perhaps why this whole bit about romanticism. But again, I think he is very much pragmatic about certain things, but at core, what he wants to convey of India is this glorious land and a glorious heritage, so to speak. He kind of revels in that.
Right. We have just one last question here. It says, when did James Tod coin the term Rajasthan, as you mentioned in your talk? And why did he feel the need to coin the term?
Yeah. So what is the land and what are names? He's also come up with Central India. That's the Malwa area. That's the Burhan. There are names for it. There already are names for it. And in the case of Rajasthan or British were using Rajputana. So he's using that in dispatches, but he feels it's not adequate. Then when you talk about individual states, they are using that. I think the thought is in his mind for a long time, but it sees public thing when he uses it in his Annals and Antiquities, so 1829. If someone can come up with a usage of it in a public place before that, I would definitely be interested and will kind of modify my talks suitably or put it in my next bit of writing on Todd. And it's been a while since I wrote on Todd, which is bad. But I would think it's around then. He's been thinking about it for a long time. And why? It's the place of Rajas. By his time, by Todd's time, there are some non-Rajput kingdoms also. So the British have just about carved out a state, which is Tonk, where the Pindaris are being urged to settle, and they have to give up their guns for it. And Amir Khan becomes, not the actor, becomes the first of the rulers of Tonk. Bharatpur has been set up already and is not ruled by Rajputs. So he is coming across those, and they are Rajas. For him, that term makes more of a sense. Ironic that the present day state of Rajasthan, as you mentioned right at the beginning, we are celebrating the foundation day of contemporary Rajasthan. And they go back to that, and they're using it not just to mean the Rajas, but it is the place, it's like Rajasthan in that sense, a Rajasthan. Probably, as I said, how do names come? Always an interesting way to explore. But then, since Todd has done enough quoting of Indian bards, let me quote another of the bards well known to everyone. And what's in a name? And a rose is a rose is a rose. By any other name? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rima. Thank you for taking out time to do this. It was great having you. I'm sure the audience enjoyed the session and had a very interesting conversation with you. I would like to thank our supporters, Royal Rajasthan Foundation and Rajasthan Royals, to have supported this talk.